Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chapter 3 of the City of Ember. This is the second recording for week 2 of our reading of this book. So if you skipped our first recording for this week, it's a 47-minute recording that's in Google Classroom. You need to listen to Chapter 2 before Chapter 3 can make any sense at all. So please make sure that you listen to these in order. Thank you so much for hanging in there, guys. This chapter only has 8 pages, so this recording should be a little bit shorter. And as we go along, I'll continue to pick out interesting words and literary devices and think about some ideas that you might be having as a reader as we go through this together. So, Chapter 3 is from Dune Harrow's perspective. It is called Under Ember. Let's have a read. That morning, Dune had arrived at the pipeworks full of anticipation. This was the world of serious work at last, where he would get a chance to do something useful. What he'd learned in school and from his father and his own investigations, he could now put it all to good purpose. So again, this is that serious attitude that Dune has shown since he was in 4th grade. So if you're looking for more detail to put into your character chart right now, you can put down that he was full of anticipation. And if you don't know what that word is, that's a great vocabulary word to grab for your Google Slides deck. But he's excited. He's interested. He thinks that all of the stuff he's learned up until this point will finally be put to good use. And so for Dune, he feels like he's going to finally have a sense of purpose in his everyday life. And that's something he's looking forward to. He pushed open the heavy pipeworks door and stepped inside. The air smelled strongly of dampness and moldy rubber, which seemed to him a pleasant, interesting smell. He strode up a hallway where yellow slickers hung from pegs on the walls. At the end of the hallway was a room full of people, some of them sitting on benches and pulling on knee-high rubber boots, some struggling into their slickers, some buckling on tool belts. A raucous clamor filled the room. Oh, that's a great word right there, raucous. A raucous clamor. Those are 2 different words, but together they mean noise. They mean chaos. I want you to imagine, a cafeteria during the middle of lunch, right? Really loud. Dune watched from the doorway, eager to join, but not sure what to do. After a moment, a man emerged from the throng. He thrust out a hand. "Lister Monk, Pipeworks Director," he said. "You're the new boy, right? What size feet do you have? Large, medium, or small?" "Medium," said Dune. And Lister found him a slicker and a pair of boots. The boots were so ancient that their green rubber was cracked all over, as if covered with spider webs. He gave Dune a tool belt, too, in which there were wrenches and hammers, spools of wire and tape, and tubes of some sort of black goop. "You'll be in Tunnel 97 today," Lister said. "Arlen Frall will go with you and show you what to do." He pointed at a short, delicate-looking girl with a white blonde braid down her back. "She may not look like an expert, but she is." Dune buckled his tool belt around his waist and put on his slicker, which for some reason smelled like sweaty feet. "This way," said Arlen, without saying hello or smiling. She wove through the crowd of workers to a door marked stairway and opened it. Stone steps led so far down that Dune couldn't see the end of them. On either side was a sheer wall of dark reddish stone, glistening from dampness. There was no railing. Along the ceiling ran a single wire from which a light bulb hung every few yards. Water stood in shallow pools on each stair, in the hollow worn into the stones by years of footsteps. They started down. Dune concentrated on his feet. The clumsy boots made it hard not to stumble. As they went deeper, he began to hear a low roar. So low, he seemed to hear it more with his stomach than his ears. It grew louder and louder. Was it a machine of some kind? Maybe the generator? The stairway came to an end at a door marked Main Tunnel. Arlen opened it, and as they stepped through, Dune realized that the sound he had been hearing wasn't a machine. It was the river. Now, this may not seem like a big deal to you, but Dune has never even seen this river. He has no real concept of what a river is. So the idea that you may have heard, water on a beach somewhere, or, if you've gone out on a sailboat or even a cruise ship. Dune's never heard that sound of running water. It's something completely foreign to him, which is why it kind of freaks him out a little bit. He stood still staring. Like most people, he had never really been sure what a river was. Just that it was water that somehow flowed on its own. He imagined it would be like the clear, narrow stream that came out of the kitchen faucet, only bigger and horizontal instead of vertical. But this was something entirely different. Not a stream of water, but endless tons of it pouring by. Wide as the widest street in Ember, churning and dipping and swirling, the river roared past, its turbulent surface like black liquid glass, scattered with flecks of light. Dune had never seen anything that moved so fast, and he had never heard such a thunderous, heart-stopping roar. The path they stood on was about 6 feet wide and ran parallel to the river for farther than Dune could see in both directions. In the wall along the path were openings that must lead, Dune thought, to the tunnels that branched everywhere below the city. A string of lights like the one in the stairway hung high up against the arched ceiling. Dune knew he was standing beneath the north edge of Ember. In school, you were taught to remember the directions this way. North was the direction of the river. South was the direction of the greenhouses. East was the direction of the school. And west was the direction left over, having nothing in particular to mark it. All pipework tunnels branched off from the main tunnel to the south toward the city. Arlen leaned toward Dune and shouted into his ear. "First we'll go to the beginning of the river," she said. She led him up the main tunnel for a long way. They passed other people in yellow slickers who greeted Arlen with a nod and glanced curiously at Dune. After 15 minutes or so, they came to the east edge of the pipeworks where the river surged up from a deep chasm in the ground, churning so violently that its dark water turned white and filled the air with a spray that wet Dune's face. So this seems very intimidating to Dune, in part because, again, he's never experienced it before. If you're looking for a good vocabulary word, chasm is a great one. So you might try that one for your slide deck. In the wall to their right was a wide double door. "See that door right there?" Arlen shouted, pointing. "Yes," Dune shouted back. "That's the generator room." "Can we go in?" "Of course not," said Arlen. "You have to have special permission." She pointed back down the main tunnel. "Now we'll go to the end of the river," she said. She led him back past the stairway door all the way to the west edge of the pipeworks. There the river flowed into a huge opening in the wall and vanished into the darkness. "Where does it go?" Dune asked. Arlen just shrugged. "Back into the ground, I guess." "Now let's find Tunnel 97 and get to work." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. "This is the map," she said. "You have one in your pocket, too. You have to use the map to find your way around here." The map looked to Dune like an immense centipede. Ooh, that's an interesting comparison. The river arched across the top of the page like the centipede's body, and the tunnels dangled down from it like hundreds of long, long legs, all tangled up with each other. So that simile describes what Dune feels as he looks at that map. You can look back at the Pipeworks map yourself and decide what you think it looks like. To get to Tunnel 97, they followed a complicated route through passageways lined with crusty, rusted pipes that carried water to all the buildings of Ember. Puddles stood on the floor of the tunnel, and water dripped into brown rivulets down the walls. Oh, there's another great vocabulary word, rivulets. Just as the main tunnel, there was a string of bulbs along the ceiling that provided dim light. Dune occupied his mind by calculating how far underground he was. From the river to the ceiling of the main tunnel must be 30 feet or so, he thought. Above that were storerooms, which occupied a layer of at least 20 feet high. So that meant he was 50 feet underground, with tons of earth and rock and buildings above him. The thought made him tense up his shoulders. He cast a quick glance upward, as if all that weight might collapse onto his head. So Dune, serious thinker, is thinking about the fact that 50 feet underground and the city seems to be a little bit in disrepair. He's a little worried about being crushed, and understandably so. "Here we are," said Arlen. She was standing next to a leak that spurted a stream of water straight out from the wall. "We have to turn the shutoff valve, take the pipe apart, put a new connector, and stick it back together again." With wrenches, hammers, washers, and black goop, they did this, getting soaked in the process. It took them most of the morning and proved to Dune that the city was in even worse shape than he suspected. Not only were the lights about to fail and the supplies about to run out, but the water system was breaking down. The whole city was crumbling. And what was anyone doing about it? This is the question that Dune is driven by. This is the question that pushes him. He feels something has to be done to change things, and he's not seeing anyone else doing anything. When the lunch break came, Arlen took her lunch sack from her pocket in her tool belt and went off to meet some friends a few tunnels away. "You stay right here and wait until I get back," she said as she left. "If you wander around, you'll get lost." But Dune set out as soon as she disappeared. Using his map, he found his way back to the main tunnel, then hurried to the east end. He wasn't going to wait for special permission to see the generator. He was pretty sure he could find a way to get in on his own, and he did. He simply stood by the door and waited for someone to come out. Quite soon, a stout woman carrying a lunch sack pushed open the door and walked away. She didn't notice him. Before the door could close again, Dune slipped inside. Such a horrendous noise met him that he staggered backward a few steps. It was an ear-splitting, growling, grinding, screaming noise shot through with a hoarse rackety-rack sound and underscored with a deep chugga-chugga-chugga. So these, as you may remember, are a little fun word, onomatopoeia. But he's trying to capture and describe what he's hearing, and those words are invented to just do that for us. So if you can imagine just the most loud, obnoxious, mechanical noise you've ever heard and multiply that, that's what Dune's hearing. Dune clapped his hands over his ears and stepped forward. In front of him was a gigantic black machine 2 stories high. It was vibrating so hard it looked as if it might explode at any second. Several people wearing earmuffs were busy around it. None of them noticed him come in. He tapped one of them on the shoulder, and the person jumped and whirled around. He was an old man, Dune saw, with a deeply lined brown face. "I want to learn about the generator," Dune screamed. But he might as well have saved his breath. No one could be heard in that uproar. The old man glared at him, made a shooing motion with his hand, and turned back to his work. Dune stood and watched for a while. Beside the huge machine were ladders on wheels that the workers pushed back and forth and climbed up on to reach the high parts. All over the room, greasy-looking cans and tools littered the floor. Against the walls stood big bins holding every kind of bolt and screw and gear and lever and rod and tube, all of them black with age and jumbled together. The workers scurried between the bins and the generator, or simply stood and watched the thing shake. After a few minutes, Dune left. He was horrified. All his life he had studied how things worked. It was one of his favorite things to do. He could take apart an old watch and put it back together again exactly as it had been. He understood how faucets in the sink worked. He fixed the toilet many times. He made a wheeled cart out of parts from an old armchair. He even had a hazy idea of what was going on in the refrigerator. He was proud of his mechanical talent. There was only one thing he didn't understand at all, and that was electricity. What was the power that ran through the wires and into the light bulbs? Where did it come from? He had thought that if he could just get a look at the generator, he would have had the clue he needed. From there, he could begin to work on a solution that would keep the lights of Ember burning. So this is kind of interesting. We learn about Dune, and we should add to the character chart, that he liked to study how things worked, that he could take things apart and put it back together again, exactly as it had been. He repaired a lot of things. And you can be as general as you want in the character chart. You can say he liked to repair things. Or you can get specific and say he fixed the toilet, he built a wheeled cart, he knew how the refrigerator worked. Everybody needs to include that he had mechanical talent. Because again, that idea of talent seems lost on the people of Ember, right? They're not assigned jobs based on talent or interest or ability. It's really just based on the luck of the draw. And then this part, which is kind of interesting, is he thought if he could just look at the generator, he could figure out electricity. Now, in the escape room, you guys had a look at how hydroelectricity works. That was a detailed picture with everything labeled. Did you understand it? Probably not, because we were using it as a clue and we only really read step 4, right? But if you went back and studied it, it would probably make more sense to you. Dune is just in a room with this giant black machine, and none of it's labeled and none of it's, described. Nobody around it is interested in explaining it to him. So ultimately, he has no idea. But the fact that Dune thought that maybe he could just figure it out if he looked at it, that shows us that Dune can be a little arrogant, a little overly confident in his own abilities, because there are things in the City of Ember that Dune just hasn't been exposed to and doesn't understand. But he actually believed just seeing it, he'd be able to figure it out. And that's not really logical. But one glimpse of the generator showed him how foolish he was. He'd expected to see something whose workings he could understand, a wheel turning, a spark being struck, some wires that led from one point to another. But this monstrous roaring thing, he wondered if anyone understood how it worked. It looked as if all they were doing was trying to keep it from flying apart. As it turned out, he was right. When the day was over and he was upstairs taking off his boots and slicker, he saw the old man from the generator room and went to talk to him. "Can you explain to me about the generator?" he asked. "Can you tell me how it works?" The old man just sighed. "All I know is the river makes it go." "But how?" The man shrugged. "Who knows? Our job is just keep it from breaking down. If a part breaks, we go put a new one on. If a part freezes up, we get oil to it." He wiped his hand wearily across his forehead, leaving a streak of black grease. "I've been working on the generator for 20 years. It always managed to chug along, but this year, I don't know. The thing seems to break down every couple of minutes." He cracked a wry smile. "Of course, I hear we might run out of light bulbs before then, and then it won't matter if the generator works or not." Wow. So just think about that for a second. This man has been living every single day working on the generator for 20 years. He has no idea how it works. He doesn't understand the very machine that he's trying to keep functioning, which would explain why it's breaking down, because nobody understands how it works. And so it would seem that the builders didn't leave clear instructions on how the generator actually functions. Or if they did leave clear instructions, they've disappeared sometime over the past 240 some odd years, right? So this doesn't make Dune feel better. This idea that all the light bulbs will be gone before the generator blows, that doesn't make Dune comforted. Instead, it just reinforces to him that somebody's got to fix this. Somehow they've got to make it better. And it really reinvigorates that urgency in him that he's got to learn as much as he can in order to contribute positively and save this city. Running out of light bulbs, running out of power, running out of time. Disaster was right around the corner. That's what Dune was thinking about when he stopped outside the gathering hall on his way home and saw Lena on the roof. She looked so free and happy up there. He didn't know why she was on the roof, but he was not surprised. It was the kind of thing she did. turning up in unexpected places, and now that she was a messenger, she could go just about anywhere. But how could she be so lighthearted when everything was falling apart? He headed for home. He lived with his father in a 2-bedroom apartment over his father's shop in Greengate Square, the small items shop, which sold things like nails, pins, tacks, clips, springs, jar lids, doorknobs, bits of wire, shards of glass, chunks of wood, and other small things that might be useful in some way. The small items shop had overflowed somewhat into their apartment above. In their front room, where other people might display a nice teapot on a tabletop, or a few attractive squashes or tomatoes on a shelf, they had buckets and boxes and baskets full of spare items for the shop. Things Dune's father had collected but not yet organized for selling. Often these items spilled over onto the floor. It was easy to trip over things in this apartment. Not a good idea to go barefoot. Today, Dune didn't stop in the shop to see his father before going upstairs. He wasn't in the mood for conversation. He removed 2 buckets of stuff from the couch. It looked like mostly shoe heels, and flopped down on the cushions. He'd been stupid to think he could understand the generator just by looking at it, when other people had been working on it their entire lives. The thing was, he had to admit, he'd always thought he was smarter than other people. He'd been sure he could learn about electricity and help save the city. He wanted to be the one who did it. He had imagined many times a ceremony in Harkin Square, organized to thank him for saving Ember, with the entire population in attendance, and his father beaming from the front row. So again, here's that idea of him being a little bit arrogant. He realizes now that he had been silly to think that he could figure it out, but he admits he'd always thought he was smarter than other people. Add that to the character chart, because it shows us that Dune assumes that other people just aren't solving the problem because they're not bright enough to solve the problem. It never occurred to Dune that maybe the problem was too complicated to solve. So, let's continue. All Dune's life, his father had been saying to him, "You're a good boy and a smart boy. You'll do grand things someday. I know you will." But Dune hadn't done much that was grand so far. He ached to do something truly important, like finding the secret of electricity, and, as his father watched, be rewarded for this achievement. The size of the reward didn't matter. A small certificate would do, or maybe a badge to sew on his jacket. So he's motivated by wanting to make his dad proud, right? But this ache to truly do something important, like fixing electricity, that's not going to die. Okay, as Dune continues through this story, you'll see that growing urge to fix things. Now he was stuck in the muck of the pipeworks, patching up pipes that would leak and break again in a matter of days. It was even more useless and boring than being a messenger. The thought made him suddenly furious. He sat up, grabbed a shoe heel out of the bucket at his feet, and hurled it with all of his might. It arrived at the front door just at the same time as the door opened. Dune heard a hard thwack and a loud ouch at the same moment. Then he saw the long, lean, tired-looking face of his father in the doorway. Dune's anger drained away. "Oh, I hit you, Father. I'm sorry." Dune's father rubbed the side of his head. He was a tall man, bald as a peeled potato, with a high forehead and a long chin. He had kind, slightly puzzled gray eyes. "You got me in the ear," he said. "What was that?" "I got angry for a second," said Dune. "I threw one of these old heels." "I see," said Father. He brushed some bottle tops off a chair and sat down. "Does it have to do with your first day of work, son?" "Yes," said Dune. His father nodded. "Why don't you tell me about it?" he said. Dune told him. When he was finished, his father ran a hand across his bald head as if smoothing down the hair that wasn't there. He sighed. "Well," he said, "it sounds unpleasant, I have to admit. About the generator especially, that's bad news. But the pipeworks is your assignment, no way around it. What you get is what you get. What you do with what you get, though, that's more important, wouldn't you say?" He looked at Dune and smiled a bit sadly. So this is kind of interesting. The idea of what you do with what you get is important. And I think that's an interesting thought, not just for this book, but also for life. We may be looking at a potential theme here, that you can still do extraordinary things, even in a limited circumstance, with what it is you've been given. So, something to keep in mind, right? I guess so, said Dune. But what can I do? I don't know, said his father, but you'll think of something. You're a clever boy. The main thing is to pay attention. Pay close attention to everything. Notice what no one else notices. And then you'll know what no one else knows, and that is always useful. He took off his coat and hung it from a peg on the wall. How's the worm? He asked. I haven't looked at it yet, said Dune. He went into his room and came back out with a small wooden box covered with an old scarf. He set the box on the table and took the scarf off, and he and his father both bent over to look inside. A couple of limp cabbage leaves lay on the bottom of the box. On one of the leaves was a worm about an inch long. A few days before school ended, Dune had found the worm on the underside of a cabbage leaf he was slicing up for dinner. It was a pale, soft green, velvety smooth all over, with tiny, stubby legs. Dune had always been fascinated by bugs. He wrote down his observations about them in a book he titled Crawling and Flying Things. Each page of the book was divided lengthwise down the center. On the left, he drew pictures with a pencil sharpened to a needle-like point. Moth wings with their branching patterns of veins, spider legs which had minute hairs and tiny feet like claws, beetles with their feelers and their glossy armor. On the right, he wrote what he observed about each creature. He noted what it ate, where it slept, where it laid its eggs, and, if he knew, how long it lived. This was difficult with fast-moving creatures like moths and spiders. To learn anything about them, he had to catch what glimpses he could as they lived their lives out in the open. If he put them in a box, they scrambled around for a few days and then died. This worm, though, was different. It seemed perfectly happy to live in the box Dune had made for it. So far, it did only 3 things. It ate, slept. It looked like sleeping, though Dune couldn't really tell if the worm closed its eyes or if it even had eyes, and expelled tiny black poop balls. That was it. So before we move on, get your giggle out for poop balls. Before we move on, let's take a look at what he's describing here. Because if we look at this metaphorically, this kind of describes the difference between Lena and Dune right now. Think about this. Who's the creature that the more confined it is to a box, the less happy it is, the less likely it is to survive? That's Dune. Dune doesn't like being confined to this city, knowing that the city has limitations, knowing that it's in disrepair. He's not satisfied with life inside of this box. Now look at the worm. The worm is happy. It eats, it sleeps, it goes on with the functions of its life. That's Lena. Lena knows that there are issues, but she chooses to ignore them. She chooses to appreciate the box for what the box is, right? As long as she's got food, shelter, family, she's good. So this seems like such a random description of bugs to drop into the middle of a book, which is why, as a reader, we have to pause and question, why is it that an author would devote paragraphs to bugs? And the answer is, this is metaphorical. This is teaching us something about people who are satisfied with the lives they're given and people who are compelled to strike out and live a bigger life, to discover the mysteries of the world, to kind of try to solve the big problems. And it's not saying that one is better than the other. It's just saying that those 2 types exist. And in this story, they're exemplified by Dune and Lena at this point. We'll see if there's any growth or change by the end of the book. I've had it for 5 days now, said Dune. It's twice as big as it was when I got it. It's eaten 2 square inches of cabbage leaf. You're writing all this down? Dune nodded. Maybe, said his father, you'll find some interesting new bugs in the pipeworks. Maybe, said Dune. But to himself he said, no, that's not enough. I can't go plodding around the pipeworks, stopping up leaks, looking for bugs and pretending there's no emergency. I have to find something important down there, something that's going to help. I have to. I just have to. So this, if you have not added to the chart that he has to help, you need to. That Dune is not content to just doing his job. He has to find something important to do, something that's going to help. It's his life's mission. It's his calling. So that's going to be really important because it's going to show us what's driving Dune through the rest of the novel. Okay? So if you took down notes based on what I've talked to you about today in your character chart, or if you picked out some words based on what I've circled here today, then that's great. If you haven't, make sure that you get those pieces done because each week you're going to be adding to them. They're not going to be graded till the end of chapter 10, but I really don't want you leaving it till the end of chapter 10 to get all that work done because then you'd have to go back over all the chapters and that's a lot of work. So just do it as you go along, makes things easier. Additionally, you have a writing assignment this week that was sent to you via email. You have been assigned a random job in the City of Ember. So your assignment this week in part asks you to email me back and tell me how you are feeling about that job assignment. And as we've read through Lena and Dune's first days, what do you imagine your first day in this new job would be? So with that in mind, you got a lot of stuff to do, but this book is so worth it. So thank you for taking this journey with me. And I will happily see you on Tuesday when we will talk about the City of Ember. Have a great day.